بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام بعد. باب الأنجاس, and the chapter on impurities and the methods in order to remove those impurities. Now, Anjaas is the plural of the words najas, and that's everything that you find disgusting. I mean, across the human race, things that are deemed as is, right? We already discussed about two things. We said there was najasa hukmiya, impurity, in which you either had to do wudu or you had to do ghusl. And if you could not find any water, you had to do tayammum. And now we're going to talk about an-najasa al-haqiqiyya, where there's actually tangible impurity present. Haqiqiyya is that an-najasa hukmiyya, that's like an integral condition for the validity of salah. There isn't any exemption in it, and you have to be in a state of purity, either through the use of water or through the use of sand. You can't just do a half of wuzu your salah. But in najas, there is a certain amount of this kind of impurity that can be exempted. The other thing to know about this type of najas, visible and invisible. So najasa al-haqiqiyya al-mar'iyya, the one that is visible, is the one that has a body. So any najasa which that is known as a visible impurity, for example, blood, blood doesn't leave behind anything. For example, like that leaves behind a body. If it's semen that leaves behind kind of has a body to it. Then you have the invisible najasa. And by invisible doesn't mean something that you can't see, but it's the opposite. It might have color, it might not have color. So blood, for example, it doesn't leave behind a tangible body. Even though it's red in color, it'll be considered as being ghayrul mar'i. And the other is an-najasa al-mar'iyya, the one which is visible, is after drawing up definition. Blood, for example, would be part of the visible najasa, as more effects are not visible. Now, the reason why we discuss the najasa is because in order to know تطهير النجس والمكان الذي يصلي فيه, that the purification of physical impurity of the worshipper and the place on which he is worshiping or praying, the actual impurity. What he means is by removing of that impurity, purifying the thing on which the place of worship, because it's not possible to actually. Other thing that it is wajib, he didn't mention that it's farz, right? In Mia, when talking about over here, he's mentioning that it's wajib, right? Then the is that farz is proven by like cannot hold any other meaning, or something straight that's very famous and that is being large numbers that cannot actually refute its existence. Right? But as far as najasa al-haqiqiyya is concerned, the one we're discussing right now, it doesn't have any unrefutable evidence with it. I mean, you have some hadiths dictating that you're supposed to remove the najasa, get rid of it, but the strength of that hadith is not the same as hadith al-mutawatir or hadith or nas from Quran. And so that's why it is wajib, in the sense that if someone rejects that the tahara from najasa haqiqiyya is part of being is necessary, then it's not the same as rejecting the Quran. I mean, they're still Muslim. But that wouldn't be the same if someone rejects the idea of wuzu altogether, because that is tantamount to actually rejecting the Quran itself. So that's the difference between the two. So purification of physical impurity is necessary from the body of the musalli and the clothes of the musalli. So it's mentioned in the Quran, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, that as for your clothes, then purify them. And also the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ to Aisha رضي الله عنها, حُطِّيهِ ثُمَّ قُرْسِيهِ ثُمَّ اغْسِلِيهِ بِالْمَاءِ, that if you see semen on the clothes, scratch it off, rub it, and then wash it with water. وَلَا يُضُرِّكِ أَثَرُهُ, and if you see any effects afterwards, that's not going to harm you. Now, obviously, if the purification of a person's clothes is necessary, and if the purification of the place where they're praying is necessary, then obviously the purification of their body will be necessary as well, because it's more important than the other two things. Now, the next question that comes to mind is, how can we attain this purification? You already know that wudu or ghusl, that purification can only be attained by water. And if water isn't present, then sand substitutes for it. Is it the same for najasa haqiqiyya, or do you have more room or less room in it? ويجوز تطهير النجاسة بالماء وبكل مائع طاهر يمكن إزالتها به. So the purification of physical impurity, that is permitted with water and with every other pure liquid. So you could probably wash off filthy using Coke if you wanted to, because it is a liquid and it is pure. So anything that flows, you can use that to get rid of najasa al-haqiqiyya, and it will become pure again. Then he mentioned some examples of ma'i'un tahirun kal-khalli wa ma'il ward. For example, by using vinegar or rose water. So that's one way of removing it. Another method of getting rid of physical impurities, for example, if it touches your shoes or your leather socks, for example. وَإِذَا أَصَابَتِ الْخُفَّ, if the najasa comes in contact with your khuf or your shoe, فَجَفَّتْ, then it dries up. Remember, this is after it dries up. فَضَلَقَهُ بِالْأَرْضِ جَازَ الصَّلَاةُ فِيهِ, then if one rubs it against the ground, then the prayer is permitted. So for those things that have a thick skin to them, for example, leather shoes, for example, then wiping them on the ground is suffice to make them pure again. والمني نجس يجب غسل رطبه فإذا جف على الثوب أجزأ فيه الفرق. Semen is an impurity whose wetness, when it's wet, it has to be washed. But if it dries up, then scraping it off is sufficient. So a third method in order to get rid of impurities is by scraping it off. Now, this usually happens when you have a very rich diet. You have a rich protein diet. Nowadays, it might be rare to find a person's semen which can actually dry up like that, like dry up and form a body which can be scraped off. Possible, but uh, more rare than it used to be in ancient times because our diet is honestly just a mess of all the different kinds of garbage that we do consume. But anyhow, if it does happen, then a third method of getting rid of najasa is by actually scraping it off. And that's also mentioned in the hadith, the Prophet's instruction to Aisha, فَاغْسِلِي إِنْ كَانَ رَطْبًا. If it's wet, then wash it. وَافْرُكِهِ إِنْ كَانَ يَابِسًا. And just scratch it off if it is dry. The question is, what if the semen dries up on a person's body? Can they scratch that off, or do they have to wash it? Some mashayikh, some mashayikh say that you have to wash it. There is no other way. And others suggest that you can also scratch it off from your body, like you could from your clothes. And this is probably the right opinion according to the fuqaha. The fourth way of getting rid of najasa, والنجاسة إذا أصابت المرآة أو السيف اكتفي بمسحهما. If a physical impurity comes into contact with a mirror or a sword or anything with a glossy surface, then you can simply wipe it off and it will become pure again. So that's a condition that it has to have a glossy, clear surface in order for you to wipe it off and make it clean again. So, for example, if it's marble, it's the surface is the same as that of a sword or a glass. Then wiping it off from marble could also purify it. وإذا أصابت الأرز نجاسة, the fifth way, and this is exclusive to land, if impurity falls on the ground, فجفت بالشمس, and the sun dries it up. Not necessarily the sun, anything if it dries it up. وذهب أثرها, and the traces of that najasa, they go away. You can't see it, you can't smell it. جازت الصلاة على مكانها, then you can pray on that location. ولا يجوز التيمم منها, but you cannot make tayammum from that place. Why? Because the condition of tayammum, صعيدا طيبا, that the land through which you're performing tayammum should be pure. That is not necessarily the case. Remember, there are two things. There's tahir, mutahir, clean or pure, and the ability to purify. So once najasa gets on the ground, it can become clean again, but it loses its ability to purify. Unless obviously you wash it, then that's another case. If it accepts washing. So that's another method, but that's exclusive to the ground. Now, up till now, we discussed quite a few methods of tadkhir. Previously, we mentioned that tanning is a method of tadkhir. If you tan the skin, it becomes pure. Scraping, rubbing, wiping off najasa from a smooth surface. All these are different methods of purifying an-najasa al-haqiqiyya. One other way is by burning something. or metamorphosis, what's known as istihala. What happens is something leaves its original reality to change into something completely different. So if you burn something, for example, it changes its physical chemical properties, it changes its name as well. So that's an example of istihala. When something changes completely, then it might become pure. For example, probably today too, not sure, but at least in the old times, what happened was that pig skin or pig flesh that used to that used that was utilized in making soap, and so obviously the haqiqa of sabun, the reality of soap, is completely different from the flesh of the pig itself. It transforms both physically, it changes a lot in its chemical properties, and also the name used for that thing, it also changes. So its reality completely changes. So metamorphosis is another way which can be used to purify filth. Now let's come to the ahkam of heavy and light filth. So whether it's najasa mar'iyah or ghair mar'iyah, it will either be heavy or it will be light. The first question is, what do we mean by heavy filth, النجاسة المغلظة? And what do we mean by light filth, النجاسة المخففة? So النجاسة المغلظة, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmahullah ta'ala, is any sort of najasa where there is a nas, where there's a legal text telling you that this is najis, then it is najis. And if there's no legal text involved, the fuqaha determined its najasa by the sake of analogy, then that is mukhaffaf. So if there is a legal text, then that is najasa al-mughallada. Whether or not the fuqaha differed in the opinion. So for example, as far as feces are concerned, right? The Prophet Islam, he said, "Innahu rijs," that this is impure, and there is no other nas telling you that it is pure or it's clean at the minimum. Then in this case, Imams Abu Hanifa suggests that this will be considered as being impure. Some suggest that najasa al-mughallada is the kind of najasa in which the fuqaha have not differed in opinion. If they have differed in opinion, then that najasa becomes mukhaffaf, right? So for example, human feces and human urine. Across the madhahib, every faqih agrees that they're najis. So this is najasa mughallaza according to Imam Abu Hanifa and according to the Sahibain. But for example, the feces of camels, goats, and cows are concerned. Imam Malik and Ibn Abi Layla, they have an ikhtilaf in that. I mean, they say that the feces of those animals whose meat can be consumed is not najis. And so the fuqaha have differed in this. But since Imam Abu Hanifa does have a legal text, he's on the position that these things are najasa mughallaza. But the Sahibain say that they're still najasa mukhaffafa. In both cases, it is an impurity, although they differ in some ahkam, which we'll be talking about. So these were the possible definitions of najasa mughallaza and najasa mukhaffafa. وَمَنْ أَصَابَتْهُ مِنَ النَّجَاسَةِ الْمُغَلَّظَةِ Whoever is inflicted with najasa al-mughalladha كالدم والبول والغائط والخمر, like blood, urine, feces, wine, and جازت صلاته معه مقدار الدرهم وما دونه. If the amount of this najasa is the size of a dirham or less, then you can pray with it, whether it's on your clothes, your body, or on the place of worship. But if it's more than that, it's more than the size of a dirham, then your salah in that case is not permitted. What is the size of a dirham? Easy test. Open your palms wide and then pour water in the middle of it. When the water stops flowing off your palm, it stays at the center of it. Uh, the diameter of whatever the water is, that is the size of a dirham, or the kind of size of dirham that they used to have, on which this hukum is being built. That is if you are unable to make a decision. Imam Abu Hanifa's original opinion is that in such cases, the opinion of the inflicted is considered as a deciding factor. Who's ever facing the situation, if they think that it's kathir, if it's a lot, then they have to wash it. But if they think that it's not a lot, it's just a minimum amount, then in this case, it is exempted. You can pray with it as well. But I mentioned that what miqdaru dirham is the size of a dirham. وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ النَّجَاسَةُ مُخَفَّفَةً بَوْلِ مَا يُؤْكَلُ لَحْمُهُ, and if light filth, like the urine of an animal whose meat can be legally eaten, if that comes in contact with the clothes of a person, their body, or the place of worship, أَنْجَازَ الصَّلَاةِ مَا لَمْ يَبْلُغْ رُبْعَ الثَّوْبِ, then it is permitted that a person prays as long as it does not reach a quarter of the garment in which he's praying, or the quarter of his body. Now, he's not saying the entire garment, but quarter of the part of the garment which comes in contact with this najasa. For example, if the najasa falls on a person's sleeves, then quarter of the sleeve is exempted. If it exceeds a quarter, then it's not allowed. If it falls on a person's front side, then quarter of the front side, that is taken into consideration, not the sleeves or the back side. And same goes for the back. If it falls on a scarf, then quarter of the scarf is taken into consideration, not the entire clothing a person has on their body. So that's the difference between najasa mukhaffafa and najasa mughalladha and the hukum between them. So he mentions in najasa mughallaza the example of blood. Remember, by blood he refers to ad-damul masfur, the blood that flows out of an animal when it is slaughtered, or the blood that flows out of a human body when a person is injured. As far as the blood that is on the meat, which remains on the meat after you've slaughtered an animal, that's clean. That's not impure. So if it comes into contact with your body or clothes, consider them clean. That's not a problem. Similarly, those bloods like the liver, that's also pure. As far as fish are concerned, the thing that comes out of them, it's not actually blood. It's some other form of liquid, although it looks like blood initially. The difference between them is if you keep it in sunlight, it turns white, the thing that comes out of sea animals. The other kind of bloods that we usually see, they don't turn white. That's one difference between them. The second is blood by nature is hot, while you know that sea animals are usually cold-blooded animals. And warm-blooded animals, they cannot live underwater. That's another indication that the thing that comes out of sea animals, fish, it's not blood, it's something else. Uh, blood of reptiles, uh, lizards, for example, that is najis. And although the blood of the martyr, for his sake, it is pure, meaning that if someone is martyred in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're not given a ghusl, because for them, that blood is pure. But for others, that blood is impure. So even if the blood of martyr reaches someone's body or clothes, it needs to be washed because it's najasa mughallaba. Khamar, for example, wine or any alcohol made out of dates or grapes, they're najasa mughallaba. But all other liquid intoxicants, they're najasa mukhaffafa. But as far as non-liquid intoxicants are concerned, for example, heroin, coke, I don't know what else, then that is actually clean. Not halal, but it's clean. Even if it touches someone's clothes or body, it doesn't really matter. We've already talked about the definitions of visible and invisible form of najasa. Now let's talk about its purification. وتطهير النجاسة التي يجب غسلها على وجهين. The purification of physical impurities, I mean washing of it, two types. فما كان له عين مرئية, if it is visible, فطهارتها زوال عينها, then its cleaning is the removal of that najasa, the body of that najasa, like completely, you can no longer see it. إلا أن يبقى من أثرها ما يشق إزالتها, unless there are traces which are difficult to remove. And what do you mean by difficult to remove? If you have to go out of your way to use detergent, or you have to heat up the water to make sure that the traces go away, uh, this is basically ما يشق إزالتها, the traces which are difficult to remove. So if you have to go out of your way to actually do extra things to remove it, then even if such traces remain, your the object will become pure after washing away the main of the najasa. That's number one, which is the visible impurity, النجاسة المرئية. وما ليس له عين مرئية, and that which does not have visible substance to it. فطهارتها أن يغسل حتى يغلب على ظن الغاسل أنه قد طهر. Then you keep on cleaning until the person cleaning is inclined to believe that it's now pure. So the original hukum is dependent on a person's inclination, but if they cannot form an opinion, the fuqaha suggests that 3 times should suffice. And each time you, if possible, should make sure that the water separates from the body. Now we talked about najasa or physical impurities. Let's talk about another term that is used, which is known as istinja. So istinja is the cleansing of the excretory passages. والاستنجاء سنة يجزئ فيه الحجر والمدر وما قام مقامهما. Istinja is sunnah, and you can use stones, cloths, or any alternative in order to actually uh, complete this sunnah. Nowadays, we use toilet paper to do that. That's also permissible. And you can only use um, rocks and cloths and other alternatives if the thing coming out of your passages it's the normal. If it's out of the norm, for example, if someone bleeds, two things. First, stones and cloths, these things can be used only on the excretory passages and if that thing is normal. If, for example, if someone vomits or if someone's bleeding, then just washing it off with a piece of rock or tissue won't work. You actually have to wash it. So that's the first thing that you need to remember. So one must rub the area until it's clean. وَلَيْسَ فِيهِ عَدَدٌ مَسْطُونٌ. There's no prescribed number of pieces of tissue that a person must use or stones that a person must use when cleaning these areas. But using them in odd numbers, that's another sunnah altogether. So at-tanqi, inqa is wajib. You have to clean it. At least that's wajib as much as it takes. But then there's no specific number to it, but it's better to do it in odds. If you can do it in three, then that's good, or else go to five or seven. But if you do it with four or six, that's also permissible. وَغَسْلُهُ بِالْمَاءِ أَفْضَلُ. Washing it with water is best. If you combine the two, first you wipe it off using tissue and then you wash it, that is like the best of the best. Because Ahlul Quba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He praised them in the Quran by saying, فِيهِمْ رِجَالٌ يُحِبُّونَ أَن يَتَطَهَّرُوا, that in that qarya, in that village, there are people who love to clean themselves. And so that's a praise by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet asked them that what is it that you do in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praising you? And they say that we don't suffice on wiping those passages with rocks or cloths. We also wash them as well. So washing is afzal, it's better. And in some cases, washing is the only way. وَإِن تَجَاوَزَتِ النَّجَاسَةُ مَخْرَجَهَا. If the physical impurity exceeds its orifice or the passage, the area of the passage itself, لم يجوز فيه إلا الماء, then you have to wash it. There is no other way. And I mean, the use of water, it's like so close to fitra. I mean, I don't know if you're interested in football or not, but there are a lot of tweets going around, Europeans being shocked by seeing the Muslim shower that people in Middle Eastern or Southeast Asian countries used. I mean, they suffice by just wiping it off, but we usually cannot get that itminan, or that peace of mind until we actually wash it. So it's so close to fitra that anybody seeing it for the first time cannot help but admire the fact of the cleanliness and the purity that is being promoted by Islam itself. So yes, it's better to use water, and in some cases, you have no other option but to use water. Wal ma'ir, and not just water, you can also use any other pure liquid to do the same thing. ولا يستنجي بعظم ولا روث. Uh, things by which you cannot perform istinja, bones or dung, for example, impure things in themselves. ولا بطعام ولا بيمينه, and you cannot perform istinja with food items, for example, bread or your right hand. Why can you not do it with bones? Two reasons. One, uh, a person might hurt themselves by doing that, especially if it's broken in between. Can be kind of like a sharpener. It might cut something, make you bleed. Second, it's mentioned in the hadith that the Prophet Islam forbade the use of bones for performing istinja, and he said that this is the food for your brethren from the jinn. And why not rawth? Why not dung? Because first of all, it is an impurity in itself. You cannot wipe away an impurity with other impurity. Second of all, the same previous hadith he mentioned, and that do not do istinja with the rawth because it is the fodder for their animals, like fodder for the animals of the jinn. Wala bid'am, you can perform istinja with food items. Why? Because it is a waste of food. Wala biyaminihi, and neither the right hand, because the right hand is not for such things. So whether you want to clean your nose or you're performing istinja, you're instructed to use your left hand. You should not be touching these parts of your body with your right hand. It's not as if it's haram or something. It's just disliked. Food, for example, that's makruh tahrimi because it's israf. But as far as using your right hand bones or tongue, or obviously you can use it with tongue because then you cannot achieve the purification that you're after. But right hand and bones, that is makruh. Disliked to the extreme, but you cannot say that if that's totally impermissible. And with that, we actually come to the end of Kitab al-Tahara. Walillahi alhamd. And so if you have any questions about what